They said I was just the wife, the one who smiled at galas and stayed silent in meetings. But behind closed doors I watched everything. Every lie. Every transfer. Every betrayal. And when the empire he built on secrets started to crack, I didn't scream. I acted. This is the story of how I took it all back, quietly. Precisely. Permanently. My name is Camille Ashford, 46 years old, wife of the chairman of Ashford Global Resorts, a luxury hotel group spanning from Chicago to Dubai. For more than 2 decades, I stood in the shadow of my husband, the man the business world praised as a visionary titan, Grayson Ashford. That night, I wore a square-neck navy gown custom-tailored in Milan, paired with a vintage sapphire brooch that once belonged to Grayson's grandmother. I didn't wear it to draw attention. I wore it as a quiet reminder, to myself and to anyone watching, that I was still part of this legacy, even if someone else was trying to rewrite my place in it. The Ashford Crown Hotel in downtown Chicago was the crown jewel of our empire. On the 47th floor, the private rooftop restaurant Volare had been reserved entirely for our annual family executive dinner. It was a tradition Grayson cherished, where board members dined, discussed strategy, and enacted the picture-perfect family tableau he adored so much. I had planned every detail. A decade-aged Bordeaux for Grayson, dim amber lighting under Swarovski crystal pendants, and the temperature set precisely at 71 degrees Fahrenheit, so he wouldn't get impatient or sweat through his shirt. Mom, everything's flawless. As always. My daughter Lena approached, her soft coral lipstick glowing under the chandelier. She was 22, finishing her master's in business at Northwestern. Her energy carried her father's charisma, but her quiet steel? That came from me. Any word from Dad? Asked Miles, her twin, standing beside her, adjusting the cuff of his blazer. He rarely spoke much, but when he did, it always mattered. He said he'll be 15 minutes late, I replied calmly, eyes glancing over the seating chart. Grayson late or something suspicious late? Lena's brow arched. I smiled faintly. We've played supporting roles for 20 years, haven't we? Tonight is no different. Then the glass door slid open, and in walked the last person I'd hoped to see, Eloise Ashford, Grayson's mother. 78, regal as ever, her white cashmere coat brushing against the floor, silver hair swept into a chignon. She gave me a glance, nodding slightly. Grayson's late again. He mentioned he had a call with some investors in Dubai, I said evenly. Eloise took a slow sip of her wine, the look in her eyes colder than the Riesling. His father never missed a dinner. Being on time is a form of respect. I gave her a courteous smile, offering nothing else. By 7:15 p.m., 16 guests were seated around the long oak table. Only 2 seats remained vacant, one at the head for Grayson, and the other left nameless, intentionally. I had a feeling. At 7:30, the double doors opened. Grayson entered. Same expensive suit, same effortless charm, same arrogance in his step. But this time he wasn't alone. She walked beside him with sleek auburn hair, porcelain skin, and a form-fitting crimson dress that didn't try to hide the unmistakable swell of pregnancy. She walked beside him, tall, poised, and visibly pregnant. Her copper-toned hair fell in gentle waves, her skin luminous under the restaurant's soft glow. She wore a scarlet silk sheath dress that clung to her curves, the swell of her belly unmistakable. At least 4 months along, the room, once filled with the quiet hum of polite conversation, fell into utter silence. Grayson's smile didn't falter. It was the same calculated charm he used with investors, but his eyes gleamed with something else, control. Apologies for the delay, he said smoothly, placing a hand on the woman's back as if introducing a product line. Everyone, this is Tessa Lin, our new director of Pacific Strategy. He paused, letting the moment stretch unbearably long before finishing, and the mother of our future heir to the Ashford legacy. He turned to me as he said it, a challenge thinly veiled behind casual arrogance. I stood, not hurriedly, not emotionally, every movement measured, every breath deliberate. My dress didn't crease. My posture didn't shift. For 2 decades I had trained for this moment, though I never wanted it. While they expected outrage or tears, I delivered something far more dangerous, grace. Tessa, I said with a serene smile, my voice carrying easily through the tense room. It's lovely to finally meet you. She hesitated, just slightly, before placing her hand in mine. Her fingers were cold, her grip unsure. I gave it a gentle squeeze, like welcoming a distant cousin I didn't particularly care for. I could feel the tremble in her palm, as if she already knew this wasn't her triumph to celebrate. "Please," I said, gesturing with an open palm, "sit beside me." I motioned to the open chair I had left deliberately unmarked, the one reserved for unexpected guests. Grayson blinked, a flicker of confusion breaking through his polished exterior. Still, he pulled out the chair like the attentive host he pretended to be. Tessa sat, her smile tight, her posture unsure. From across the table, Lena's jaw clenched. Miles shifted in his seat, folding his napkin over twice. But I remained composed. I lifted my wine glass with perfect calm. "Well," I said, letting my voice float, "I think we're all in need of a drink after such surprising news." I let the word linger, smooth as silk and twice as cutting. "To the future of Ashford Global and new beginnings." The glasses clinked. Polite, hollow, forced. I turned to Tessa with a pleasant tilt of the head. "I read about your success in the Osaka rollout. Innovative work. Tell me, what do you forecast for Tokyo if you expand your integrated spa hospitality model with seasonal offerings?" She blinked, surprised, then recovered. "We anticipate a 16% uptick in local retention rates, especially if we tailor services around the Sakura festivals and offer curated packages with regional artisans." I nodded. Clever. Guests remember experiences rooted in culture. As she explained her plans, confidence growing with each word, Grayson sat frozen, watching me, studying, waiting for the explosion. But there would be no scene, no glass shattering, no weeping. I was still at the table, still in control. And unlike him, I knew exactly what came next. By the time the main course was served, roasted sea bass over parsnip puree with saffron oil, I gently redirected the conversation. "Lena was recently accepted into the Horizon Leaders Initiative at Wharton," I said, keeping my voice casual as I looked across the table. "Tessa, I imagine your experience navigating Pacific markets would offer her some helpful insight." Lena nodded stiffly, her lips curved in a polite smile, but her eyes remained locked and cold. Tessa shifted in her seat, looking at me first, then at Grayson, clearly unsure whether she should feel honored or wary. I didn't let her flounder. "Tessa," I said gently, voice just low enough to be intimate, "I don't blame you." Her breath caught, almost imperceptibly. I kept my gaze warm but steady. "We all get swept up in what we think is love, until we realize it was just an unsigned contract." For the first time that evening, I saw something real flicker in her eyes, guilt. Not for being here maybe, but for how it was done. She looked away, murmuring something about leadership dynamics in Seoul, her voice softening. Dinner moved on, but Grayson had lost control of the room. His carefully choreographed power play had dissolved. The attention, once fixated on his dramatic entrance, now pivoted toward quiet questions and subtle glances, to me. I placed my wine glass gently on its coaster, the stem still cool from the chilled table. That's when Grayson stood, tapping his spoon against the crystal rim of his water glass. The room stilled immediately. Every fork paused midair. Board members, investors, even family members leaned forward in expectation. Grayson cleared his throat, wearing that practiced expression reserved for quarterly reports. "I believe," he began, his tone smooth and calculated, "this is the perfect moment to share a pivotal direction for Ashford Global Resorts." I slowly began swirling my wine, never breaking eye contact. "For the past year," he continued, "my team and I have been building the groundwork for a bold leap forward, expanding our footprint into Southeast Asia, specifically Singapore." A few in the room perked up, impressed. Others looked to me, searching for a cue. I gave them nothing, just a faint, unreadable smile. "We've established a new venture, Summit Line Asia, headquartered in the Marina View Tower," he added, dropping the prestigious address like a gauntlet. "This will serve as the central command for all Southeast expansion efforts. We're creating a more agile, market-responsive branch, separate from the traditional structure." I tilted my head slightly and took out a pen, jotting on the edge of my linen place card. Not a word yet on ownership. Deliberate ambiguity. Grayson gestured toward Tessa. Given her experience in Tokyo and her strategic success in the Osaka integration, Tessa will lead operations. She gave a modest nod, smiling, but I noticed the slightest tremble in her bottom lip. Summit Line has already begun conversations with top developers in Singapore, Grayson continued, and signed MOUs with 2 luxury hospitality firms. I nodded once slowly, the faint smile still fixed in place. Just as I expected. Grayson paused, letting the weight of his announcement hang in the air as he swept his gaze around the table. This is a breakthrough initiative to shield high-risk investments from the primary operating framework, he explained smoothly. Summit Line Asia allows us to navigate emerging markets with flexibility, insulating Ashford Global from any potential volatility. The words were well rehearsed. The logic sounded plausible, but not convincing. So just to clarify, said Martin Locke, our senior CFO, folding his hands calmly over his plate, capital for Summit Line bypasses our current accounting infrastructure entirely? Grayson's eyes didn't flicker. Correct. All funding is routed through Ashford Private Equity. It's more agile that way. Under my direct oversight. That was the moment I looked straight at him. He didn't blink. But I saw it. Beneath the custom suit and polished presentation, this wasn't about corporate expansion. It was about a personal escape hatch. Tessa was pregnant. Singapore was remote, out of reach of U.S. regulatory scrutiny, far from the Ashford board, and far from me. If Summit Line succeeded, Grayson could quietly transfer assets under his name or even Tessa's, mother of the so-called next heir. If it failed, Ashford Global wouldn't take the hit. It wasn't listed in the core structure. Clean. Calculated. Cowardly. Grayson, I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the room's scattered murmurs. Could you elaborate on the legal ownership of Summit Line? Who holds the titles? Does Ashford Global retain majority control? For the first time he hesitated. It was only a fraction of a second, but it was enough. We're finalizing the filings now, he replied quickly. Ownership will be clarified within the next quarter. We're waiting until strategic partnerships are fully committed before releasing that information. A hollow response. I gave a small nod. I do hope those filings include a legal representative from Ashford Global. Ensuring shareholder protections would be prudent. I turned slightly toward Martin. Wouldn't you agree? Martin nodded, his brow creased. Absolutely. A quiet ripple moved across the table. More than one board member leaned toward their neighbor. Whispered doubts. Nervous glances. The temperature of the room had shifted. Grayson glanced at me again. This time the calculation in his eyes was gone, replaced with unease. He knew. I wasn't asking as the chairman's wife anymore. And I wasn't bluffing. No one noticed as I reached for the leather clutch at my side. While he painted his grand vision of international disruption and legacy rebranding, I quietly unlatched the hidden clasp beneath the flap. Inside sat a thick ivory envelope, its seal unbroken. Rowan and Keating LLP, our family's long-standing law firm. The same firm where Lawrence Ashford, Grayson's father, once served as senior counsel. Grayson always thought I was just good at entertaining clients, arranging galas, smiling when required. He had forgotten something critical. I was the only person Lawrence had ever trusted with the original legal documents after he'd stopped trusting his own son. And after 8 months of careful auditing, 3 private consultations with the firm, and 47 nights combing through off-record transfers, I was ready. I stood up. The clatter of silverware ceased. Conversation evaporated. The weight in the room was heavier than when Grayson had first strolled in with his pregnant mistress on his arm. I didn't need to tap a glass. I didn't need to raise my voice. The change in the air was enough. Thank you, Grayson, I said smoothly, my gaze traveling across the long table, making sure no one missed what was coming, for your presentation on Summit Line Asia. But before we move on to discussions of unnamed strategic partners and offshore coordination centers, there's something the board should hear. Grayson blinked, his smile fading just a touch. Tessa's posture stiffened beside him. Lena and Miles both looked at me now, curious, uneasy. They knew I never spoke without purpose. I opened the ivory envelope from my clutch and carefully removed a set of crisp pages, thick parchment, navy ink, sealed with the Rowan and Keating insignia. I handed one copy to Martin, our CFO, another to Ellen Pierce, chair of the Internal Oversight Committee. The rest I placed directly in front of Grayson. This is the original governing clause of the Ashford Legacy Trust, established in 2008 shortly after your father, Lawrence Ashford, retired from active leadership. Grayson let out a short, incredulous laugh. That document was ceremonial. My father gave me everything. No, I said gently, but with unmistakable firmness. He gave you shares, not voting control. I lifted my chin slightly as the room fell even quieter, if such a thing were possible. Per Article 9 of the Trust Charter, I continued, voting authority for Lawrence Ashford's Class A shares in Ashford Global shall reside with the lawful spouse of the sitting CEO, contingent upon a marriage duration of no less than 10 years and no active divorce filings. Every word was carefully enunciated. Not for drama but for clarity. Grayson stared at the document. His hand flexed against the edge of the table. You're trying to humiliate me in front of the board, he muttered. I met his eyes. No, Grayson. I'm trying to prevent you from dismantling what your father spent his life building. Martin flipped through the first few pages, his jaw tightening. Ellen began typing swiftly on her tablet. Not a single person laughed. Not one person came to Grayson's defense. You're not qualified to lead this company, he snapped. You've never. I've read every operations report since 2002, I said, cutting him off without raising my voice. Every quarterly memo you discarded. Every investment review you ignored. I was the one who flagged the Morocco expansion losses. I was the one who quietly authorized the proxy votes after your father fell ill, because he asked me to. I reached into the folder once more and slid out another document, setting it gently beside his untouched dessert. The corporate registration for Summit Line Asia, I said. Filed in Singapore. All shares registered under your name and Tessa Lynn. Grayson stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. You've been spying on me? This is betrayal. I stayed seated. Calm. Steady. Betrayal. I raised an eyebrow. You showed up to a family dinner with your mistress and declared her unborn child the future of the company. You funneled over $20 million from our internal development funds into an offshore entity with no board approval. And you call me the traitor. Tessa paled. The room didn't just fall silent. It turned. And for the first time that evening, Grayson realized he wasn't the one in control anymore. Tessa said nothing. Her face drained of color as she slowly pushed her chair back, retreating into silence. I didn't need her to speak. Her absence of protest said enough. I believe it's time the board evaluates who truly has this company's best interests at heart, I said evenly, turning toward Ellen Pierce, head of internal oversight. I formally request an emergency meeting to be held tomorrow evening. Ellen gave a single nod, decisive and immediate. Approved. Grayson sat down slowly, like his body had just remembered its own weight. His face had lost all color. His confidence peeled back layer by layer. And in that moment, after 20 years, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear. At 8 o'clock the following morning, I entered the executive boardroom on the 49th floor of Ashford Global's headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of Lake Michigan, but no one was admiring it. The table was already lined with neatly stacked files, everything I had compiled over the last 3 months. On each cover, the red wax seal of Rowan and Keating's legal department. There was nothing emotional about this. Nothing reactionary. This was strategy. Evidence. Procedure. Martin Locke sat at the far end, dark circles beneath his eyes. Ellen Pierce was straight-backed and alert, fingers poised above her tablet. Lena and Miles, seated quietly at the corner, watched me closely. Then Grayson walked in. His charcoal suit was wrinkled at the sleeves. His tie hung slightly askew, perhaps the first time in years he'd tied it without assistance. Tessa wasn't with him. Probably wise. Thank you all for being on time, I began, my voice measured and unshaken. Let's begin with a question. I stepped forward and rested my hand on the first folder. Has anyone here heard of a company called Westmere Strategic Holdings? A few board members exchanged glances. One or two shook their heads. Grayson's jaw clenched. It's a shell company, I continued, opening the file, registered in Singapore under Grayson's name, established quietly this past spring. No legal affiliation to Ashford Global. No board oversight. No declared purpose. Grayson lurched forward in his seat. You're twisting this. It's not what you're suggesting. I didn't respond to him. I turned to Ellen. Over the past quarter, $38.6 million was siphoned from internal development funds, strategic partnerships, and research allocations. Those funds were routed through multiple shell entities, 3 registered in Hong Kong, then funneled into a private account at Blue Shore Bank in Singapore. A murmur spread across the room. I retained 3 independent forensic auditors to verify the full trail. Their reports, notarized and reviewed by legal counsel, are in front of you now. As if on cue, my assistant entered the room carrying a locked briefcase. She opened it, retrieving individually bound folders and passing them to each board member. Grayson stood abruptly. This is slander. You're bitter and jealous, and you're trying to ruin me. I turned my full attention to him, my expression calm and cutting. Jealous? You stole nearly $40 million, rerouted it into a personal foreign asset, and jeopardized this company's integrity. And now you expect to stand here and call it leadership. He faltered. Because everyone in that room already knew. He was finished. Jealousy. I turned to Grayson, my voice as cold and precise as glass. If you can provide legitimate proof that over $38 million benefited Ashford Global in any form, I'll issue a public apology. I leaned slightly forward, keeping my tone even. But allow me to refresh your memory. Part of that money was used to purchase a luxury penthouse at Marina View Residences in Singapore, under Tessa Lin's name. The rest is sitting in a personal revolving credit account registered solely to you, completely detached from company assets. The room was dead silent. No one reached for their coffee. No one cleared their throat. No one came to his defense. Grayson scanned the boardroom, his eyes darting from Martin to Ellen to the junior legal associate at the end of the table, searching for anyone who might toss him a lifeline. None came. I was planning to disclose everything next quarter, he stammered. It's part of a tax optimization structure, meant to create a more flexible investment pipeline. Ellen cut him off with surgical precision. A more agile approach to embezzlement, she said, her tone like steel under velvet. And a deliberate attempt to bypass oversight. Grayson faltered. Martin opened the file before him with shaking hands and adjusted his reading glasses. I've reviewed every disbursement you authorized, Grayson. Not one of these withdrawals went through proper board channels. Not one came with a financial impact report. You moved funds without review or disclosure. You bypassed every safeguard this company put in place. I lowered myself into my seat slowly, my hand resting on a thick folder marked with a red seal. Emergency Action, Article 11.4. I submitted these findings to our legal team last night, I said. If the board agrees, we have cause to immediately suspend Mr. Ashford from his CEO role, freeze all related corporate and private accounts tied to the investigation, and initiate a full internal audit. There was no dissent. Not a single board member objected. Grayson sagged into his chair. His complexion had turned ghostly. And the man who once commanded rooms with a flash of his grin now looked like he couldn't even find the ground beneath his feet. He stared at me like he was seeing someone he'd never truly looked at before. But I had been there the entire time. I met his gaze with the calm I had perfected over 2 decades, standing behind him, watching, learning, preparing. Not to destroy him, but to protect what he had taken for granted. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles pale and tight. The room had ceased being a boardroom. It had become a tribunal. A courtroom in which only truth and paper spoke. Then Elaine Monroe, Ashford Global's lead counsel, stood. Her voice was firm, her eyes steady. Based on the evidence submitted by Mrs. Camille Ashford, supported by 3 independent audit reports and internal compliance reviews, we find that Mr. Grayson Ashford committed multiple breaches of fiduciary duty, in violation of Article 9 of our corporate ethics policy. I didn't flinch. I didn't gloat. I wanted him to feel every inch of his fall not as vengeance but as reality catching up. Elaine continued, per corporate charter, the board may vote to suspend the acting CEO immediately upon substantiated evidence of misconduct. Ellen nodded without hesitation. I propose we vote now. The room responded as one. Every hand went up. Every single one. Grayson turned to me. His eyes were rimmed red, voice low and cracking. Camille, do you really want to do this to me? I looked him square in the eye. No, Grayson. You did this to yourself. I'm just the one who finally said aloud what everyone else was afraid to, I finished quietly. Ellen Pierce stood and addressed the room. The vote is unanimous. The suspension of Mr. Grayson Ashford takes effect immediately pending full investigation. All executive authority will now be transferred to the acting CEO, who, under the Ashford Legacy Trust, holds the controlling proxy vote. I rose. No one stopped me. No one questioned it. They had seen enough. I will assume the role of acting CEO, I said, my voice clear and resolute. And I intend to work with this board to stabilize operations, restore stakeholder trust, and conduct a full audit of our financial structure. Martin Locke turned to look at me. For years I had seen only weary indulgence in his eyes, as if he were tolerating the presence of a chairman's wife in matters too complex for her. But now there was something different. Respect. Grayson didn't move. He sat frozen in his chair, his hands limp, staring at the space between us as though trying to calculate what went wrong. The man who once believed he was invincible now looked like a child who'd been caught with stolen matches and a pile of ash where a house once stood. Then the doors opened. In stepped Victoria Ashford, Grayson's mother. Regal as ever, her silver hair swept into a tight bun, a soft dove-gray coat draped over her shoulders. In one gloved hand she carried nothing but her phone and an air of gravity. I came as soon as I heard, she said, her voice measured, weathered by decades in international philanthropy. Lena called. I nodded respectfully. Please have a seat. You may want to hear what's been uncovered. Victoria sat beside me without hesitation, her gaze drifting immediately to her son. Grayson, she said slowly, do you remember what your father left you? Grayson didn't answer. She continued. Not just wealth. Not just the company. He left a reputation. A name respected in every hospitality circle around the world. And you've come dangerously close to destroying all of it, for vanity, for greed. Mother, he started, voice hoarse. No, her tone stopped him cold. There are no explanations that undo what's already been done. No one here believes you anymore, and frankly, neither do I. He lowered his head. His shoulders sagged under the weight of her words. Then she turned to me. Camille, you have a steadiness I didn't even see in myself when I sat at this table years ago. You didn't just save this business. You salvaged the last shreds of this family's dignity. I closed my hand over the edge of the table to keep it from trembling. I only did what Grayson should have done. I put Ashford Global and the people it employs first. The meeting resumed. What followed was a blur of firm but focused discussion, crisis management protocols, client reassurances, a fast-track PR plan. I led it all with calm efficiency. And honestly, I had been preparing to lead for years. Just in silence. When the meeting finally adjourned, Ellen leaned in with a wry smile and whispered, You're not the CEO's wife anymore, Camille. You're the CEO. And if you ask me, Ashford Global has never been in better hands. I didn't expect to see Tessa again. But 3 weeks later, she walked into my office. No defiance. No red dress. She wore a sand-tone blouse and a coat that looked more practical than polished. She was calm. Grounded. Camille, she said gently. Thank you for seeing me. I nodded. Of course. Sit down. Let's talk. Tessa settled into the chair across from my desk, her hand resting lightly on the curve of her belly. She looked different, gone were the bold reds and tight silhouettes. Today, she wore a soft pleated skirt and a beige trench, simple and elegant. For the first time, she looked like a woman, not a performance. I thought I'd hate you, she said plainly, no apology in her tone. But turns out, you're the only one who didn't lie to me. I tilted my head slightly, waiting. No need to rush this moment. Grayson said he'd leave you, she continued. Said he'd marry me. Promised I'd be a co-owner of the Singapore company. We'd raise the baby in Marina View and start fresh. All the lines you'd expect from a man like him. She gave a brittle laugh. But when I asked for the ownership documents, he said we'd handle it after the baby was born. When I asked again about the parent company overseas, he got cold. Defensive. That's when I knew. She looked down at her hands. I stayed quiet. But some truths speak loudest in silence. She drew in a breath and pulled something from her coat pocket, a folded printout of an email. He sent this to a broker in Guangzhou. She slid it across the desk. It was short. Ruthless. Tessa is transitional. Once the holdings are finalized, I'll cut ties discreetly. She didn't cry. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed dry. There's nothing more crushing than realizing you were just a tool in someone else's scheme. I exhaled slowly, steadying the air in the room. What do you plan to do now? I'm leaving, she said, straightening. I accepted an offer from Orion Capital in Hong Kong. They've asked me to lead strategy for the Asia-Pacific region. She hesitated. But I'm not just leaving. I want to build something new. Not for him. Not for a title. She met my eyes. I want to partner. I blinked, surprised by her clarity. You want Orion Capital to propose a partnership with Ashford Global? I asked. She nodded. I know I have to earn trust back. But I believe in my ability and I'm willing to prove it. I studied her face, the determination, the remorse, the vulnerability. Finally, I gave a small nod. We'll evaluate it thoroughly. But if you're serious, I'm open to the conversation. Tessa let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said quietly. I just want to do something right. For myself. And for the child I'm bringing into this world. 4 months later, she stood before a room of high-ranking investors at the Pan Pacific Business Forum in San Francisco. Her heels clicked with confidence. Her voice, clear and persuasive, laid out Orion's co-venture model with Ashford Global. With an initial investment of $22 million, we project a 35% increase in regional market share within 3 years, she concluded, locking eyes with the board. I gave a quiet nod from the front row. She wasn't the woman Grayson had paraded into a family dinner. She was something entirely new. Later, I found her in the terrace garden behind the venue. The sun dipped low, painting gold through the trees. Thank you, she said softly. For not shutting the door. Not everyone owns their mistakes, I replied. But you did something Grayson never could, you changed. Tessa rested a hand on her belly. I won't let this child grow up under a man who only knew how to manipulate people. And for the first time, I believed her. I want my child to grow up seeing their mother as someone who stood up for what's right, Tessa said, her hands still resting over her belly. I looked at her, this woman who had once entered my life like a wrecking ball, and felt something unexpected settle in my chest. Warmth. You're doing well, Tessa, I said sincerely. You're not running, you're rising. She turned to leave but paused at the door, glancing back over her shoulder. I used to think you were the enemy, she said quietly. But now I realize you were the role model I never had. She disappeared down the corridor. I stood still for a long moment, the hum of city traffic below faint through the glass. And for the first time in years, there was no anger left inside me. Only a strange, steady peace. The woman who once helped fracture my family was now helping build something better for both of us. And I finally believed something I hadn't in a long time, that endings, no matter how painful, can be beginnings if we're brave enough to turn the page. 3 months after Grayson's removal, Ashford Global felt like an entirely new company. Departments that once operated under pressure and politics now functioned with efficiency and clarity. Staff walked the halls without tension in their shoulders. And the shareholders who had once questioned my presence now asked to meet me privately to talk strategy over dinner or wine. They no longer saw the chairman's wife. They saw the woman who had saved what he almost destroyed. That morning, I entered the boardroom on the 28th floor. The Ashford crest gleamed against the oak-paneled wall and sunlight poured in through the full-length windows, painting the table in gold. It was time. This was the meeting that would determine the company's next CEO, not acting, not interim, but permanent. I sat quietly, my breath steady despite the way my hands pressed together beneath the table. We'll proceed with one agenda item, Chairman Langley said, his voice echoing slightly. The vote for Chief Executive Officer of Ashford Global Resorts. Each board member stepped forward in silence, placing their votes into the glass ballot box at the center of the room. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. 11 minutes later, Langley broke the seal and opened the envelope. With 8 out of 9 votes, he said, pausing to meet my eyes, I formally appoint Camille Ashford as Chief Executive Officer of Ashford Global. Applause followed, soft at first, then steady. But what moved me most was the figure in the back of the room. Victoria Ashford, Grayson's mother, stood with her hands clasped. She didn't smile, not at first. But her eyes were glassy with emotion as she nodded slowly. There was no resentment left. Only quiet pride. 1 week later, I stood at the podium at our downtown Chicago headquarters. No music. No dramatics. Just truth. Today, I announced, we introduced the Ashford Legacy Trust, a new governing structure built on ethical review, independent oversight, and sustainable strategy. The room stirred. A reporter raised her hand. Does this mean you're changing how the Ashford family manages succession and power? I looked directly into the camera, voice unwavering. I'm not just changing it, I said. I'm redefining what legacy should mean. I'm setting a new standard, I said, not just to correct the past, but to protect the future for everyone who believes in what this company could be. That press conference marked a turning point, but it was just the beginning. Later that month, I began assembling the Ashford Succession Council, an independent body under the Ashford Legacy Trust. The goal was to remove nepotism from leadership decisions and bring transparency to succession planning. The council would be made up of startup founders, community leaders, educators, and ethics specialists, people who understood both growth and responsibility. The internal nominations began pouring in. One name stopped me cold, Tessa Lynn. For a moment, I hesitated. But then I remembered the woman I saw at the partnership ceremony. The one who stood with clarity, not desperation. I scheduled a brief meeting. Tessa arrived right on time, dressed simply in slate gray, a file clutched in her hand. "I'm not sure I'll be chosen," she said, placing the folder gently on my desk. "But if you're building something strong, something lasting, I want to help lay one of the first bricks." I met her eyes. "Do you want to build the foundation or crack it?" She didn't flinch. "Build it." I gave a slow nod. "Then I'm ready to listen." When the Ashford Legacy Trust was formally inaugurated, I stood inside the newly established council chamber at our Chicago headquarters. Hanging above the fireplace was a portrait, not of me or Grayson, but of Lawrence Ashford, his father. Not to glorify his era, but to remind everyone what happens when power forgets its responsibility. After the ceremony, Victoria approached me quietly. "My husband once told me," she said, "that if anyone was ever going to finish what he couldn't, it wouldn't be a son. It would be a daughter." I turned stunned. "And now," she said, gently taking my hand, "I believe that daughter is you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just held her hand a little tighter. Some truths don't require words. They just need to be lived. That evening, I stood outside the maternity ward of Northside Women's Hospital, peering through the glass at a newborn in a soft blue-lit bassinet. Her cheeks were pink, her tiny fists balled like she was ready to fight the world and win. A nurse stepped beside me with a knowing smile. "You're family to Miss Lynn, right?" I nodded and walked into the room. Tessa sat upright in bed, a little pale but glowing in that indescribable way only new mothers do. She reached out, and I took her hand. "I named her Lila," she whispered. "I want her to have a clean start, no shadows of what came before." I looked at the baby, then back at Tessa. "Lila is beautiful. And you've already made the first right choice." Tessa swallowed. "I don't expect anything. I want her to grow up in a family better than the one I knew." I paused, considering what it meant, what it would mean. "If you're open to it," I said slowly, "Lila can carry the Ashford name. And if you'd like, I'd be honored to help raise her as part of our family." Tessa blinked, stunned. A single tear slipped down her cheek, not of grief, but of hope. Hope she never thought she'd be allowed to have. A week later, we held a small welcome gathering at the Ashford estate. No photographers, no media, just close friends, a few trusted colleagues, and my children, Sophie and Miles, bickering about who would hang Lila's name on the new crib. Sophie, now 26 and VP of HR, leaned in with a smirk. "You think she'll want to study economics someday? If so, I'm saving her a future internship in my department." Miles, 22, rolled his eyes. "She's going to be a coder. I'll start her with JavaScript next Christmas." I laughed, watching the future unfold in front of me. And this time, it was a future built on truth, trust, and a name that finally meant something more. I laughed, shaking my head as Miles, now 22, ran over from the buffet table holding a cupcake with smudged icing. "I don't care what Lila grows up to be," he said proudly. "As long as she plays video games with me." The whole room chuckled. The tension that had once haunted these walls was gone, replaced by something that felt real. Unforced. Whole. Tessa sat beside me, her eyes rimmed with red, but her expression soft. Peaceful. She wasn't the same woman I had first met. And though I knew she still carried the weight of her past, she had stepped onto a new path, one that led through forgiveness, not shame. She wasn't an outsider anymore. That night, after the last guest had gone and the laughter had faded into quiet, I stood alone in my study. The room was warm with amber light from a single desk lamp. On the shelf across from me sat a black and white photograph, Lawrence Ashford, standing beside a much younger Victoria, his hand resting on a dark wooden box I had seen a few times but never dared to open. The door creaked open. Victoria entered, now older, but with that same grace I had come to respect deeply. In her hands was the very box from the photo. She placed it on the table without a word, then gently slid it toward me. "Lawrence left this for the person he believed would carry the true values of this legacy," she said softly. "He once hoped it would be Grayson. But in time, we both saw it clearly it was never going to be him." I stared at the box, heart steady but hesitant. "I can't. I'm not a..." You're not an Ashford by blood, she said firmly, but you are the reason this family still stands. And no one is more deserving. I opened the box slowly. Inside sat a gold ring, simple yet regal, set with a single emerald. It shimmered faintly in the light, like it had been waiting all along. I slid it onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Victoria smiled, the doubt that once clouded her gaze now replaced with quiet recognition. You're not just leading this company anymore, Camille, she said. You're the heart of this family. Later, before turning in for the night, I paused by Lila's room. She slept soundly beneath a soft yellow light, her tiny fingers twitching in a dream. I bent down and gently brushed a curl from her forehead. You'll grow up with truth, I whispered. Not lies. With love, not calculation. Her eyes fluttered open for a second, and her small hand reached out, curling around my finger like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. And in that quiet moment I knew. All the sleepless nights, the boardroom battles, the betrayals and buried truths, it was worth every step. Because family isn't built on shared blood. It's built on choice. On the courage to protect, to forgive, to rebuild. Later, I sat alone at my desk. The golden light of dusk spilled through the windows overlooking Ashford Global's campus. Papers lay open before me, projected growth reports, equity breakdowns, merger proposals, but I wasn't thinking of numbers. I was thinking of legacy. Not Grayson's. Not Lawrence's. But the one we were building now. I had never imagined I'd sit at the head of this empire. But during my years beside Grayson, I had studied every move, every misstep. Not to take control, but to be ready. Just in case the person steering the ship was also the one sinking it. Ashford Global wasn't just a business. It was the dedication of thousands of employees. The vision of a man who had once seen something in me no one else had. And it was the place where Sophie and Miles had chosen to believe in a future more just than the one they inherited. A future I would protect, quietly, fiercely, and without apology. Because in the end, I didn't just inherit a company. I became its keeper. I couldn't let everything fall into the hands of someone driven by ego, greed, and betrayal. Grayson once laughed when he saw me reviewing quarterly reports after dinner. Why do you even bother with those? He asked, swirling his whiskey. All you have to do is look good at the galas. I never responded. Instead, I kept studying. Quietly. Diligently. Night after night, corporate finance, risk strategy, shareholder law. While he thought I was ornamental, I became the person who understood the inner workings of Ashford Global more intimately than he ever had. So when he funneled millions into a shell company in Singapore, believing no one would notice, I noticed. There was no confrontation. No raised voice. No shattered glass or dramatic exits. Just silence. And steady hands. I printed every email. Traced every transfer. Compiled every invoice. When the time came, I laid it all on the boardroom table in front of him, methodical, complete, undeniable. The look in his eyes wasn't rage. It wasn't even regret. It was recognition. If you're feeling the weight of what's unfolding, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Let's keep going. That the board had never truly belonged to him. That the power he thought he owned was borrowed and had just been recalled. Victoria, his mother, never defended him. She stood beside me. Not as a mother trying to protect a son, but as the widow of a man who had once trusted me with a future he couldn't build himself. I had never betrayed that trust. Now the Ashford Legacy Trust was fully operational. It was built on independent review, long-term vision, and ethical checks that couldn't be overridden, not even by someone with my authority. And I didn't want the company to merely survive what Grayson had done. I wanted Ashford Global to stand as a standard, a symbol that integrity and intelligence weren't outdated ideals, but the foundation of business done right. Sophie had just launched a scholarship fund for underserved students passionate about green technology. Her initiative had already received backing from 3 universities and a corporate partner. Miles, meanwhile, was working with our tech division to develop a fully transparent supply chain platform, one that could track every transaction, every ethical standard, from vendor to customer. I never asked them to follow in my footsteps. They did it because they believed in the quiet fire that fueled me even when I never put it into words. Tessa, too, had found her place. No longer running, no longer proving, just being. She headed up our strategy branch in Hong Kong now. Her reports? Always sharp. Always honest. She didn't ask to be trusted. She earned it. I didn't forgive Grayson as a wife, but I found clarity as a leader. He lost everything because he believed power was loud, Something you could flaunt, dominate, inherit. But real power? It doesn't scream. It studies. It plans. It acts when the moment is right. That evening I stood in front of the bookshelf in my study. On the middle shelf sat a glass case. Inside it, the Ashford family ring once passed from Lawrence to Grayson. I didn't wear it every day. I didn't need to. Because my worth wasn't proven by jewelry. It was etched into every decision I'd made since the day I stopped being silent. The Ashford empire wasn't saved by chance. It was rebuilt by the woman they least expected. And I'll keep going. Not for recognition. Not for revenge. But for everyone who still believes business can serve more than profits, for those who know the future belongs to the quiet, the prepared, and the brave. No theatrics. No spotlight. Just timing.